My name is Natalie Bennett. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a geospatial risk analyst for a wildfire insurance company in Boise, Idaho. I was presenting a loss exposure model to 3 executives when my phone lit up beneath the conference table. The first message was from my mother. "We remortgaged the house in your name. You owe us $250,000 for raising you." Before I could process it, my father wrote, "If you don't sign the final papers, we'll tell everyone you abandoned us when we needed you." Then my younger brother sent, "Thanks for the fresh start, sis. You're the best." I nearly missed a question that could determine whether my company approved a $40 million contract. I steadied my voice, finished the presentation, and walked out without letting anyone see my hands shaking. In the elevator, I read the messages again. They hadn't asked for help. They had announced a debt as though my life belonged to them. What would you do if the people who raised you decided that parenthood came with an invoice? And how far would you go if they used your identity to collect it? I didn't argue. I didn't call. I opened a secure folder on my phone, saved every message, and smiled because my mother had just confessed to something she didn't understand. 3 hours later, she began calling nonstop. On the 7th call, I answered and heard her screaming, "What the hell did you do?" She thought I had ruined her plan. She had no idea I had only pressed one button. Before I tell you what that button triggered, and why my entire family gathered for what they believed would be my surrender, tell me what time it is where you are, and where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels before the truth finally catches up with them. I let the phone ring until my mother left a voicemail accusing me of being cruel, selfish, and ungrateful. By the time I reached my apartment, there were 22 missed calls, 4 voice messages, and a post in our extended family group claiming that my parents were about to lose their home because their successful daughter had forgotten where she came from. That was how my mother fought. She never began with facts. She began by assembling an audience. Her name was Carol Bennett, and she had spent most of my childhood teaching me that reputation mattered more than the truth. My father, Thomas Bennett, rarely raised his voice. He simply stood behind her and repeated whatever made her demands sound reasonable. My younger brother, Ryan Bennett, had mastered a different skill, failing in ways that inspired rescue. At 28, he had already abandoned a fitness studio, a cryptocurrency newsletter, a mobile detailing company, and an online course promising to teach strangers how to become entrepreneurs. His newest fresh start was North Star Roaming, a luxury recreational vehicle rental business he planned to launch near Coeur d'Alene. He had no commercial driver's license, no insurance approval, no secured storage lot, and no experience maintaining vehicles. What he did have was a glossy logo, a social media page full of borrowed travel photos, and parents who believed confidence was more valuable than competence. I called my mother back and legally recorded the conversation under Idaho's one-party consent law. "Explain exactly what you did," I said. "We used the equity in the house," she replied. "The lender needed your income because your father and I didn't qualify for the loan. It's temporary." "Did I sign anything?" There was a pause. "You signed documents years ago." "What documents?" "Family papers. Don't play games with me." I asked her to send every page bearing my name. Instead, she said Ryan had already paid deposits on 3 imported RVs and would lose everything unless I signed the final authorization by Monday. When I told her I had never agreed to guarantee a $4 million loan, she started crying so suddenly it sounded rehearsed. "We fed you. We kept a roof over your head. We paid for school clothes. Do you think all of that was free?" That question didn't wound me the way she expected. It clarified something I had resisted admitting for years. My mother didn't see sacrifice as love. She saw it as credit she could collect later. "Children don't sign repayment agreements for being raised," I said. "And parents don't forge their daughter's signature to finance their son." Her crying stopped. Watch what you accuse us of. I'm not accusing you yet. I'm asking. My father took the phone. He said the paperwork was practically complete, that refusing now would embarrass them, and that Ryan deserved the same opportunity I had received. I reminded him that I had earned scholarships, worked nights at a mapping lab, and paid off my student loans without their help. He replied, "Exactly. You know how to recover. Ryan doesn't." There it was. The family philosophy condensed into 6 words. I was expected to suffer because I was capable of surviving. Ryan was protected because consequences might break him. My father then threatened to contact my employer and tell them I was financially irresponsible. My mother said she had already drafted a Facebook post describing how I had abandoned my aging parents. Ryan joined the call and laughed when I asked how much of the loan he planned to repay. "Once the business takes off, all of us win," he said. "Besides, you make good money sitting behind a computer." He had no idea my job involved predicting catastrophic losses, identifying manipulated data, and documenting patterns people hoped no one would notice. "Send me the documents," I said. "All of them. I'll review everything before Monday." My mother exhaled with relief. Ryan called me the best sister in the world. My father warned me not to involve outsiders. I ended the call, forwarded the recording to a private email address, and checked my credit report. The smile disappeared from my face when I saw a mortgage-related inquiry, a new revolving credit line, and an address in Spokane where I had never lived. This was no longer a family argument about money. Someone had been living inside my identity. The following morning, I drove north before sunrise and reached my parents' house shortly after noon. I had grown up in that cedar-sided home overlooking a narrow stretch of lake, but nothing about walking through the front door felt nostalgic. My mother was waiting at the dining room table with a folder neatly positioned in front of the chair she expected me to take. My father stood by the windows with his hands in his pockets, while Ryan leaned against the kitchen island wearing a North Star roaming jacket, as though stitching a company name onto fabric made him a chief executive. "Sign the highlighted pages, and this can all be over," my mother said. I didn't sit. I opened the folder and photographed every document. The loan package identified me as a co-borrower and claimed that the Coeur d'Alene house was partially held in a family trust of which I was a beneficiary. It listed my Boise income, my employer, an old checking account number, and an electronic signature dated 11 days earlier. From a distance, the signature looked like mine. Up close, the final stroke curved backward in a way mine never had. "Where did you get this?" I asked. My father said I had signed a general authorization when I was 21. Melissa looked up from the file and met my eyes. "It depends on how far they took it," she said. "But based on what you've shown me, this is no longer just a family dispute." That statement pulled a memory from a place I had kept sealed. 11 years earlier, during my final semester of college, my parents had mailed me a stack of forms and said they needed my signature to update a college savings account. I had been working 2 jobs and sleeping 4 hours a night. I signed 3 marked pages without ever receiving the complete packet. At the time, Ryan had sent me a photo of himself at a ski resort wearing a jacket that cost more than my monthly rent. When I asked how he could afford the trip, he said Dad had found extra education money. I believed the money was theirs. Standing at the table now, I wondered whether that first signature had become the key they used to open every door afterward. "You kept blank signature pages," I said. My mother's expression tightened. "We kept family records." "And you reused my signature." Ryan rolled his eyes. "You're being dramatic. Mom and Dad aren't stealing from you. They're investing in me." He explained that the $250,000 would cover deposits on RVs, a lakeside storage property, marketing, and 6 months of operating costs. I asked whether he had signed a personal guarantee. He said the lender preferred my credit profile. So you get the company, the vehicles, and the profits while I get the debt? I asked. You get equity later. Where is that written? He looked at our mother. She told me family didn't need contracts with one another. I placed my phone on the table and played part of the previous night's recording. My father's face changed when he heard himself threatening my employer. My mother lunged for the phone, but I picked it up first. You recorded us? She demanded. I documented you. The difference terrified her. She began listing everything they had supposedly done for me: braces, birthday parties, rides to school, groceries, and a used laptop when I was 16. Every memory had been converted into a line item. I asked whether they had kept a similar account for Ryan's failed businesses, legal fees, trips, and rent. Ryan called me jealous. That was when my father finally admitted the house had already been pledged as collateral and that they had received an initial bridge advance of $62,000. Some of it had gone toward Ryan's vehicle deposits. The rest had covered urgent family expenses. What expenses? I asked. No one answered. My mother tried to redirect the conversation by saying the loan could still be canceled if I signed a revised agreement. That made no sense. If the transaction were legitimate, my signature wouldn't be needed to cancel it. I closed the folder. I'm taking copies. My father blocked the doorway and said the originals couldn't leave the house. I told him I only needed the photographs already stored in 2 cloud accounts. Ryan stepped closer and whispered, "Don't destroy this because you're bitter that I'm finally doing something big." I looked at him and remembered every time I had been told to shrink my needs so he could expand his dreams. I'm not destroying your business, I said. I'm removing the stolen foundation underneath it. My mother warned that if I walked out, she would tell every relative I had chosen money over blood. Then make sure you spell my name correctly, I replied. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed with an automated alert from the lender. Someone had attempted to access the loan portal using my credentials. Seconds later, another message arrived from Ryan. Sign by Monday, or you'll regret it. He thought the threat would scare me back into obedience. Instead, it gave me the first piece of evidence showing he wasn't an innocent beneficiary. He knew exactly whose identity was holding his future together. I called my aunt, Rebecca Hayes, from a gas station outside town. She was my mother's older sister and the only relative who had ever apologized without attaching a demand. Instead of comforting me, she fell silent when I described the loan. Come to my house, she said. Don't call your parents again until you see what I have. Rebecca lived 40 minutes away in a small house surrounded by apple trees. When I arrived, she locked the door, closed the curtains, and placed a metal cash box on the kitchen table. Inside were copies of bank transfers, insurance correspondence, and a handwritten agreement dated 9 years earlier. The agreement stated that Rebecca had loaned my parents $38,000 to resolve a transportation incident involving Ryan, and that they would repay her after refinancing their home. They never had. What transportation incident? I asked. Rebecca told me that when Ryan was 19, he took my father's truck after drinking at a graduation party and struck a parked vehicle. The impact pushed that vehicle into a motorcycle, injuring its owner. Ryan left before the police arrived. My father later claimed he had been driving, while my mother paid the injured man privately and pressured Rebecca to contribute. They told the family Ryan had made one mistake, Rebecca said, but it wasn't just one. Over the next several years, she learned that my parents had used money from a custodial account established by our grandparents to cover Ryan's legal fees and failed business ventures. The account had originally been intended for both of us. By the time I finished college, my half was gone. The forms I signed at 21 hadn't simply updated an education account. They had released my claim against the trustee, my father, and acknowledged distributions I had never received. I felt anger, but beneath it was something colder. My parents hadn't suddenly become desperate. They had built a system in which my name, my money, and my achievements existed to absorb Ryan's consequences. Rebecca then showed me a recent bank statement that had been mailed to her address by mistake. It listed a recurring payment from an account bearing my name to a credit monitoring service. "They've been watching your credit," she said. I checked the account number against my report. It matched the revolving line opened in Spokane. Rebecca recognized the address as the apartment of one of Ryan's former girlfriends. That meant someone had likely used an old address, my social security number, and stored signature documents to create a financial profile outside my view. I asked why Rebecca had never told me about the trust account. Tears filled her eyes. She said my mother had threatened to cut her off from the family and tell everyone she had tried to extort them. Rebecca had stayed quiet because she believed silence would keep the peace. Silence didn't keep the peace, I told her. It kept their system alive. We sat together until neither of us could pretend this was simply about a mortgage. Then Rebecca handed me the original handwritten loan agreement and said she was ready to provide a statement. I contacted a consumer protection attorney named Melissa Grant, whose firm specialized in identity theft and fraudulent lending. Melissa reviewed the photographs, credit report, messages, and recording through a secure portal. Her first instruction was not to warn my family. Her second was to freeze my credit with all 3 bureaus, notify the lender's fraud department, file an identity theft report, and preserve every communication. The single button I had pressed after receiving the first messages was the Report Unauthorized Activity option inside the lender's portal. That action automatically suspended the loan, blocked pending disbursements, and triggered an internal compliance review. My mother's panicked calls had begun when the bridge lender froze the remaining funds and demanded identity verification from every applicant. Melissa warned that my parents might try to portray the fraud as a misunderstanding. To defeat that defense, we needed evidence that they had knowingly used my identity without my permission. Ryan's messages helped, but Melissa wanted the complete digital trail through a formal dispute request. We obtained login records showing that the application had been submitted from my parents' home network and later edited from Ryan's phone. A verification video uploaded to the lender showed my mother holding a copy of my driver's license beside the camera while claiming I was traveling and had authorized her to act. The video lasted 37 seconds. It was enough to unravel 32 years of family mythology. My mother had always called me the cold one, yet she was the person who looked directly into a camera and calmly pretended she had permission to sell my future. I asked Melissa what would happen next. Melissa said the lender would likely reverse the fraudulent obligations attached to me, but the initial $62,000 had already been released. The lender could pursue the house, the borrowers, the recipient of the funds, or all 3. Ryan's vehicle deposits might also be seized. My parents believed I was preparing to negotiate. In reality, their documents were moving through a system that didn't care how many birthday cakes they had bought for me. For the next 10 days, I behaved exactly as my family expected. I didn't post online, argue in the group chat, or respond to provocative messages. I told my mother I wanted one final family dinner to find a solution. She interpreted that as surrender. Within an hour, she changed her Facebook post from accusing me of abandonment to praising the power of family forgiveness. Ryan messaged that he was willing to give me 5% of Northstar roaming if I signed immediately. When I didn't respond, he increased the offer to 8%. Then he warned that the vehicles would be delivered soon and that any delay would cost him thousands. Melissa told me to keep him talking. I asked for invoices, business plans, deposit receipts, and proof of insurance. Ryan sent a chaotic folder containing manipulated projections, copied market research, and invoices for 3 RVs purchased through a dealership in Washington. One invoice showed a deposit of $27,500 paid from the bridge loan funds. Another showed $18,000 transferred to a branding agency owned by Ryan's friend. The remaining money hadn't gone entirely toward the business. Bank records revealed withdrawals at a casino, a payment for a speedboat, and $9,400 sent to an online trading platform. Ryan had spent the fresh start before the company even existed. Meanwhile, Melissa's investigator found that my parents had applied for 2 earlier loans using variations of my information. One application had been rejected because the uploaded pay stub didn't match my employer's format. The second had been withdrawn after a verification call. This wasn't an impulsive act, born of desperation. It was a repeated plan. My mother had tested several doors until one finally opened. I also learned that my promotion had been placed on temporary hold. Our company's background monitoring system had detected the new debt and address discrepancy because I worked with confidential catastrophe models. My director didn't accuse me of wrongdoing, but he said compliance needed the matter resolved before I could be appointed to lead a new regional risk unit. My family's fraud had already reached the career they claimed proved I could afford to rescue them. One night, I sat alone in my apartment and let myself feel the full weight of the damage. I had spent 10 years building a reputation for accuracy and trust. My mother had endangered it with a copied signature and a lie told into a webcam. Revenge would have been easy if all I wanted was to hurt them. I wanted something more difficult. A separation so complete that they could never attach themselves to my future again. Melissa prepared a dispute affidavit, a formal demand ordering them to cease using my identity, and notices preserving my right to pursue civil damages. The lender's fraud investigator, Aaron Bell, asked whether I would participate in a controlled meeting. He wanted my family to discuss the loan while believing I was still willing to sign. Melissa proposed holding the dinner at Rebecca's house because it had security cameras, and she had no financial interest in my parents' property. I invited my parents, Ryan, Rebecca, 2 relatives my mother had recruited against me, and my parents' longtime accountant, whom they had blamed for the paperwork confusion. I told everyone the purpose was to resolve the debt privately and prevent public embarrassment. My mother agreed immediately. She asked whether I would sign at dinner. I said, "Bring every original document, and we'll settle what belongs to whom." She heard the promise she wanted to hear. Before the dinner, I drove to Coeur d'Alene alone and walked past the house where I had grown up. A real estate photographer was taking exterior pictures. My father later claimed the lender required updated images. Aaron told me the truth. After the fraud alert, the lender had ordered an emergency collateral assessment because the house might be subject to recovery. My parents had borrowed against nearly all of their remaining equity. If the fraudulent guarantee disappeared, their income wouldn't support the loan. They had risked their home for Ryan's company and assumed my salary would protect them from reality. The day before the dinner, Ryan called me from the RV dealership. He said the owner was threatening to cancel his purchase because the remaining funds hadn't cleared. "Fix this," he demanded. "You froze the money." I reported unauthorized activity connected to my identity. Same thing. Only if the activity was unauthorized. He cursed and admitted that Mom had signed because everyone knew I would refuse if they asked first. Then he said, "Once the business made money, you would have thanked us." That recording gave Melissa what she needed. Ryan had acknowledged both the forgery and the intention to conceal it until after the loan was funded. I asked him one final question. "Did you know they used my name before the first deposit?" "Of course I knew," he replied. "It was my business plan." The sentence lasted 3 seconds. It would eventually cost him everything. My mother arrived at Rebecca's house carrying a pie and a leather folder, dressed as though we were celebrating instead of discussing fraud. My father brought a portable scanner. Ryan arrived late in a rented luxury SUV wearing his North Star roaming jacket. Uncle Martin, Cousin Paige, and my parents' accountant Leonard Brooks joined us because my mother wanted witnesses to what she believed would be my surrender. Melissa sat beside me, introduced only as my financial advisor. Aaron waited in Rebecca's study, observing through the home's security system. Dinner lasted 11 minutes before my mother pushed the folder toward me. "Sign this, and we can put everything behind us." The agreement did more than confirm the loan. It waived my right to dispute earlier transactions, approved their use of my financial records, and opened another credit line for Ryan's company. They were asking me to legalize the past and finance the next fraud. I read every page while Ryan reminded me that his dealership deadline was midnight. My father told me Melissa should leave because this was a private family matter. "She stays," I said. I asked Leonard whether he had prepared the income documents attached to the application. After looking through the papers, he said they weren't records produced by his office. My father immediately claimed Leonard was confused. Melissa placed the electronic application on the table and showed that it had been edited from Ryan's phone. Ryan said everyone in the family shared devices. I played his recorded admission. Of course I knew. It was my business plan. His face turned red. He reached for my phone, but Rebecca stepped between us and reminded him that the house was recording. My father ordered everyone to leave. That was when Aaron entered, identified himself, and announced that the loan had been classified as suspected identity fraud. The remaining funds had been canceled, and the lender was demanding repayment of the $62,000 bridge advance. The house could enter foreclosure because the loan had been obtained through material misrepresentation. Ryan's vehicle deposits and accounts were also being reviewed as traceable proceeds. My mother gripped the table and stared at me. "What have you done?" "I removed my name from your crime." Melissa handed my parents the identity theft affidavit, evidence preservation notices, and formal demands ordering them to stop using my personal information. Ryan received a separate packet naming both him and North Star roaming. My mother turned to the relatives for support, but neither of them looked at her. Paige asked whether the Facebook story about me abandoning my parents had been a lie. My mother said she had written it because she was scared. Rebecca connected a tablet to the television and displayed screenshots from a private group chat. One message from my mother read, "Once Natalie's income is attached, the bank can't say no." Another said, "Don't mention signatures until the money clears." The argument changed instantly. My father blamed Ryan for pressuring them. Ryan blamed my mother for storing copies of my identification. My mother accused my father of uploading false documents. Their united front collapsed the moment consequences entered the room. Leonard left after asking whether his name had been used anywhere else. Ryan shouted that I had destroyed his only real opportunity. "You had opportunities," I said. "What you never had were consequences." He threatened to make me regret humiliating him, but Melissa warned him that threatening a documented victim during an active fraud investigation would be reckless. Aaron then informed him that the rented SUV outside had been paid for through an account under review. Ryan froze and demanded that my parents take him home. My father laughed bitterly and said Ryan was the reason they were losing the house. My mother finally screamed that she had only been trying to save her son. "You have 2 children," I replied. "You simply decided only one of us deserved saving." Even then, she asked whether I would withdraw the report and sign a smaller guarantee. That request erased every remaining doubt. She understood exactly what she had done. She simply believed motherhood should shield her from the consequences. I stood and told everyone the dinner was over. My father asked where they were supposed to find $62,000. Ryan demanded reimbursement for his deposits. My mother screamed that I had chosen strangers over family. "No," I said. "I chose the truth over people who used family as camouflage." Ryan followed me outside and accused me of enjoying their panic. I admitted I felt relief. not because they were suffering, but because the consequences were finally attached to the people who had created them. Behind me, my mother shouted my name. For the first time, I didn't turn around. The lender's investigation moved quickly after the dinner. My forged guarantee was removed. The unauthorized credit account was closed, and the fraudulent inquiries were deleted from my credit file. My employer received proof that I was the victim, not the source of the financial irregularities. 6 weeks later, my delayed promotion was approved, and I became Director of Regional Catastrophe Intelligence, leading a team across 5 Western states. My family had nearly damaged the career they claimed proved I could afford to rescue them. The consequences for them were severe. The lender demanded repayment of the $62,000 advance and referred the application to state and federal authorities because interstate banking systems and electronic documents had been used. My parents avoided immediate prosecution by cooperating and entering into a restitution agreement, but they couldn't save the house. They had already drained most of its equity through older debts connected to Ryan. The property was sold under lender supervision, and after fees and liens, almost nothing remained. My parents moved into a small duplex outside Spokane. My father took seasonal warehouse work while my mother sold furniture and household items online. Ryan's business collapsed before renting a single RV. The dealership canceled the purchases, returned the disputed funds, and retained part of the deposits. His branding agency sued him for unpaid fees. The speedboat was repossessed, and his trading account held less than $900. He eventually filed for bankruptcy after investigators showed that business funds had been mixed with gambling withdrawals and personal expenses. For years, Ryan had called every failure a fresh start. Bankruptcy forced him to call it a record. My mother contacted me from new numbers after I blocked her. Her messages shifted from rage to guilt, then to nostalgia and bargaining. First she wrote, "You took our home." Then she sent childhood photographs as proof that I owed them. Finally, she promised never to ask for money again if I would just pay their rental deposit. I forwarded every message to Melissa and never responded. My father sent a letter claiming he had been too weak to stand up to my mother and Ryan. He asked me to forgive him separately, but he had signed the documents, threatened my career, blocked the doorway, and defended the fraud until an investigator walked into the room. His silence had never been innocence. It had been participation. I didn't answer. 8 months later, Ryan called from an unknown number and asked for $5,000 to complete a commercial driving program. He insisted this request was responsible and different. I told him I hoped he finished the program. Then he asked whether I would pay. "You earn more than that in a week," he said. "That doesn't make my money yours." He accused me of enjoying his suffering. I told him the consequences weren't suffering I had created. They were bills finally delivered to the correct address. He hung up and never called again. Rebecca and I grew closer. She testified about the old trust account, and we obtained a written settlement confirming that money intended for me had been misused years earlier. There was very little left to recover, but the truth mattered. Rebecca also stopped calling silence peace. She began warning younger relatives that family secrets usually protect the person causing harm, not the people being harmed. 1 year after the first message, I stood before my new team presenting a model showing how ignored risks become catastrophic. Halfway through the presentation, I realized my family's collapse hadn't begun with the $250,000 loan. It had begun every time my parents erased Ryan's consequences and renamed my obedience as love. It grew every time I accepted being the responsible daughter as a permanent financial obligation. By the time they forged my name, they no longer believed they were crossing a boundary. They believed no boundary existed. That became the lesson I carried forward. Blood does not create unlimited access. Raising a child is not a loan. Love is not a debt collector. And loyalty does not require sacrificing your identity, your credit, your career, or your future. Boundaries often feel cruel to people who benefited from your lack of them, but their anger doesn't make those boundaries wrong. Financial freedom isn't just having money, it's knowing that your labor, your identity, and your future belong to you. Emotional freedom is accepting that some people will call you selfish the moment exploitation stops working. I didn't save my parents' house, Ryan's company, or the version of our family that existed only when I obeyed. I saved the part of myself they had trained to disappear whenever someone else demanded more. My mother asked for $250,000 as payment for raising me. In the end, the most valuable thing she gave me was the moment she forced me to calculate the true cost of staying. I smiled because I finally understood that I could refuse the invoice. So tell me honestly, if your family forged your name, threatened your career, and sacrificed your future for the child they had always protected, would you forgive them? Or close the door forever? Thank you for listening and watching until the end. All characters, conflicts, and events in this story are fictional and created solely for entertainment and educational purposes. We hope this story reminds you that when people use your forgiveness as permission to repeat the same behavior, you are allowed to change the rules. Forgiving someone does not mean giving them unlimited access to hurt you again.